in case you haven't heard, the future is abundant. I kind of want to stick with this theme. We're going to wrap around it and we're going to come back to it. I often get asked for a permaculture soundbite. One time I got upset because somebody asked me to give them a 30-second soundbite on what permaculture design is. And I just looked at him and started yelling about how, why would you trivialize my life's work into a 30-second soundbite? Well, I've finally come up with a 30-second soundbite in about 5 seconds. And it is permaculture design is decision-making and problem-solving protocols based on the patterns of nature. And patterning is where we usually start with permaculture. I want to talk a little bit about patterning and again, wrap it around to make a little bit more context about what we're doing in Los Angeles and other cities around the world. Pattern understanding is what Bill Mollison described, his sort of version of pattern recognition and pattern literacy, where nature is our only teacher. And that really stuck with me. I was able to, I was fortunate and maybe unfortunate enough to travel around with Bill Mollison for a little while. We were good friends for a long time. And we have sort of had a conversation about patterning. And once I saw him starting to apply some of the things that he talked about, maybe on the chalkboard, um, once I started seeing the way that he used patterning and pattern recognition, it all sort of came tumbling down for me. He used to talk about that we could lose all the universities and we would lose nothing. But if we lose the forest, we lose everything. And I'm starting to understand what he meant by that. Permaculture, first and foremost, is about design. We get confused a lot, I think, with methodologies and principles and protocols. We get confused, I think, about the techniques and technologies that we use sometimes with permaculture design. Um, but I want to focus a little bit about how I see the principles and protocols, and also talk about attitudes of design. I love the garden becomes the metaphor as our metaphor. I love that the fact that permaculture's most beautiful, probably elegant, probably sexiest application is with gardening. It's probably the most I would say the most popular vision and version of permaculture design. I've spent a long time telling people all over the world that permaculture is not about gardening. Permaculture is about problem solving and decision making. It's critical thinking. You use permaculture, you don't do permaculture. And that's a huge difference in a lot of the things that you see and read around out there. There's a lot of things going on, people talking about how they do permaculture. And I've been doing this for a very long time, and I don't know what that means. But when you think about permaculture in the context of using permaculture in what you do, then it makes a great deal of sense. Anything that can be designed, any discipline can use permaculture design. When I'm talking about what is the highest generalization, one of the things that I always kind of interrupt people about, and when we're talking about gardening, let's use the garden as a metaphor. When we're talking about gardening, I like to interrupt and say, what does that mean? What is that? Is that something that we're doing? Is that the objective? How does that work? When we look at the garden, what we're really doing is the way that Buckminster Fuller would ask us is, what is the highest generalization? And by that, it's like, what are we really doing with gardening? What is really happening? Well, we could come to a point where we're adding nutrients, we're extracting resources, we're doing all these things, but ultimately we come to that we are managing soil. We're not really gardeners. So when we're using permaculture, when we're talking about permaculture design, we're not really gardening anymore. We're soil managing. And the brilliant thing, the beautiful thing about thinking like this is that when we talk about the highest generalization, there's so many other things that can fit into place now. There's so many things that can go into soil managing instead of just gardening or just food production or just somehow limiting that highest generalization. What we're really ultimately coming to when we talk about methodologies of design is that we're not really gardening. The vegetables that we have are a byproduct of our efforts of soil management. So we're really trying to create, ultimately, is achieve the maximum amount of byproducts that we can get through our efforts. So the highest generalization being soil management, then it becomes that we are creating the conditions. We're not just gardening, we're creating the conditions for vegetables to happen. That's what's happening there. That's what's going on in the garden. And now, just that statement, we're creating the conditions for vegetables to happen. You can think about all the stuff that we do for the soil management, and it's a byproduct of that effort becomes the vegetables. And as we go into this, into permaculture, that's sort of one of the mantras that we carry is that we're creating the conditions for X to happen, creating the conditions for community to happen, creating the conditions for whatever it is. It becomes really, really helpful to think about the highest generalization and creating the conditions to cause something. Permaculture is ultimately about design, like we said. And when we talk about design, we also talk about principles, and I like to divide some of those into attitudes. There's a lot of people out there talking about permaculture principles, and I saw recently at a teacher training that we gave, there were people presenting like 64 principles or 75 principles, or there's David Holgren's got a book, and he actually came out with principles. And you search through Bill's book, there isn't really a list of principles. I'll show you in a minute what I use. But a lot of it is really about attitudes of design, attitudes that we maintain that can help us arrive at decisions. And that's another thing that we talk about is arriving at decisions and not imposing decisions. Lots of Mollisonisms out there. The problem is the solution. I think it's one that stuck with me for so long, and I could never really get my head wrapped around it. I've got a lot of different stories that I've come up with since I began to get an understanding of that. Like I said, I traveled with Bill Mollison. I learned the most by watching him work, watching him do consulting, or watching him, talking to people about their landscape. So when he talked about the problem as a solution, I have a quick story that usually takes me a long time to tell. But there's a client of mine that I had in Texas. I saw that some of you are from Texas. Called us up one time and said, I've talked to half a dozen consultants, and I understand you guys are eco designers. Could you come and look at my ranch and put some kind of eco killer on the grasshoppers? So I thought about it for a second, and I know a little bit about entomology. I know a little bit about grasshoppers. I know a little bit about cattle. Obviously, there was a lot of cattle involved here. The problem was the grasshoppers in his mind. The problem was the grasshoppers because they're competing for the grass. Obviously, the cows trying to, all of his cattle trying to eat the same grass. So he wanted to get rid of them. So we walked around and looked all over his ranch, and sure enough, there was thousands, like the parting of the Red Sea. There's thousands of grasshoppers that took off in both directions as he walked through there. I mean, it was crazy. So thinking about the problem is the solution, that kind of, was ringing home. The problem is the solution. In other words, it's kind of like that saying about if the world gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? So if we were standing somewhere talking about that these grasshoppers are a problem, who would we have to be? Where would we have to go? What would the circumstances have to be? What would the conditions have to be that we create, that we're standing there saying, I wish we had millions of grasshoppers? The problem becomes the solution. So a simple twist of thinking about how to solve things. So I remembered seeing guinea fowl and turkeys eating lots and lots of grasshoppers. I remember thinking one time that in order to make an economical attempt at raising turkeys, we'd have to, it would be ridiculous because we'd have to have millions of grasshoppers. Well, here it was, millions of grasshoppers. So, as we go through it, it's like we don't have too many grasshoppers. We just don't have enough turkeys. It's sort of an idea of getting it's a sort of getting your head wrapped around that there are ideas out there that we could be looking at that we're not seeing right now, and we open it up. And that's another big part of permaculture design, is to open it up and open up our minds. The problem is the solution. So again, permaculture is ultimately about design. So we also have methodologies of design, and some of you are familiar with that, where we have, with every design discipline out there has sort of their methodologies of design. There's architectural methodologies of design. There's landscape architecture. Every discipline that you go to, I took a interior design program, and there was a whole list of methodologies of design that you go through to arrive at solutions. Now, I'm stressing that arrive at solutions because a lot of times when we talk about methodologies of design, we get it confused with techniques. We get it confused with technologies that are out there. The idea the of arriving at solutions sort of comes to me in this another story about another client. Years and years ago, I had never heard of a straw bale house. This is a slide of a straw bale house under construction. Um, I had never heard of it, and I was taking a workshop, and they said they were talking about the straw bale house, and I thought it was a big joke, like the first little pig is right, and all this stuff. But then it was one of those classic situations where there was a painting on the wall, a framed painting that was actually hinged. They turned the painting, and there it was, bales of straw behind the plaster. I thought we were sitting in a thick wall adobe building. So I was amazed. I was intrigued. I met Mats Merman, who sort of did this whole revival of straw bale buildings in America. Told us about all these different straw bale buildings. So I was intrigued with building with straw. So I built a couple of houses. An article got written. Somebody read the article in Hawaii and called me up later on and said, "Could you come to Hawaii and build me a straw bale house?" It's like, I read this in the magazine. I always tease people and say, I read this in Eco Hipster magazine, and we want to be eco hip, so we need a straw bale house, right? So I'm talking to him on the phone. As much as I want to get paid to go work in Hawaii, straw bale technology is an appropriate technology for your site. And I usually throw this question out: why is straw bales inappropriate technology in Hawaii? Anybody want to take a stab at it? The Well, I'm setting you up because mostly people will talk about how it's too moldy. Thank you. It's too wet. Um, all these things come up, right? And then when we go to straw bale construction and we look at 100-year-old buildings in Nebraska with 12-foot snow drifts, then we see that no, there's actually ways to deal with that. I lived in a straw bale building over in the Skagit Valley, 60, 80 inches of rain for the first half of the year. So all you need is a big roof and a well-drained area. There's ways to mitigate those kinds of things. But what we're really talking about in permaculture design are sectors: the rain, the sun, the wind, all of those things, right? When we're using permaculture design, we arrive at a solution of using straw bales as a building material when the outside influencing energies, the sectors, dictate it, when it leads us to super insulation, right? So that means when it's super hot or super cold or both, right? That you would need super insulation. Well, think about Hawaii. It's like high of 72, low of 72. It doesn't have the temperature extremes that straw bales are solving. So it is an inappropriate solution to arrive at. The outside influencing energies in Hawaii are more like the wind, the ventilation, things like that. So we would design a building with ventilation and, that could sway in the wind or deal with the floods or, those kinds of things. It is crazy to think about that there are actually people superimposing a solution because they think that it's eco-hip onto a landscape. Like, as if it's the way to go just because they read about it in Eco Hipster magazine or just because it's the new fad or just because it's like permaculture design keeps us from doing that. We arrive at solutions, we don't impose solutions. Right? The ideas, we'll keep going with this. But the other really interesting thing about methodologies and arriving at solutions is we're asking, how do we do it? Who's going to use it? What's there? Trying to be holistic thinkers. My mind was blown once again when I worked with Yonto Evans. If you don't know, if you don't, funny, Paul, if you don't know Yonto Evans, he's a really, really interesting character. He sort of single-handedly brought cob building technologies to the forefront in people's minds. Everything about cob you've probably ever heard, you could trace back to Yonto Evans up in Oregon. Um, but what was interesting is he used to ask us what I did some workshops with him, both stove making workshops and construction workshops many, many years ago. But when he used to ask us is, when are we? When are you? It's like a bad hangover. It's like it's like many times I've woken up and asking where, answer me truthfully, where am I? But no one ever asked me, when am I? Like, when are you? So you see this picture of a thistle. We're going to come around to this thistle. This is my parable of the thistle. You know what grasses are, right? Grass is, some of the characteristics of grass are that it has parallel veins. People could keep going with that. Parallel veins. It doesn't put on cambium. It's got, remember from seventh grade plant physiology, it's got vascular bundles. It's got, but what it mostly has that I want you to be aware of is it has basal meristems. That means the growing cells are at the base, at ground level. So each cell that grows pushes the cell above it up, up, right? As opposed to other plants or shrubbery that has apical meristems. The meristem cells, the growing cells, are on the tips, the apex. So, a cell goes on top of itself. A new cell is on the tip every time. Whereas grass is the opposite. It pushes it up. So the oldest cells are at the top, the youngest cells are at the bottom. Think about that for a second. Think about that. Think about that grass for just a second and think about how that has co-evolved on the planet, all over the planet, has co-evolved with heavy animals, right? Think about that grass. The grass has co-evolved with heavy animals. That means that the grass itself, the energy of the grass is stored in the mobile parts of that system. Grassland systems, there's animals and plants. The grass is stored in the animals. If you know anything about grasses, then it's like it doesn't like to grow in its own thatch. That's why one of the reasons straw is on the drawing board, because usually it gets burned because production of grasses, you don't want the thatch on there. Unlike a forest, a cambium producing forest somewhere depends on a fallen forest and rotting of its previous incarnations for it to grow through and thrive and survive, right? But grasses, they don't like that. So if you think about cattle or other kinds of heavy animals on grasslands around the world, bison, horses, whatever it happens to be, all of that co-evolve with those grasses. Now, when you when the disturbance is so great that it starts to compact the soil, right? If it starts to compact the soil and the nutrient is lost, say if we put up barbed wire, or we put up horses in a corral, or we somehow confine the natural movement of cattle, then the grasslands become overused or overgrazed. And what happens is that grassland no longer mines minerals from below. It no longer has this cycle of give and take any longer. It starts to degrade, right? And what happens is the grasslands call in the thistles. It calls in the thistles. What are thistles? When you think of the highest generalization of thistles, what do you think of when you think of the intrinsic characteristics of a thistle? Right? We describe the intrinsic characteristics of the grasses. What are some of the intrinsic characteristics of the thistle? Look at this photo. It's got spikes. It's bitter. If you've ever tried to pull one out of the ground, it's got a deep taproot. Look at its function in the landscape. It's such an incredibly beautiful thing. What it's doing is it's repelling grazing animals. It's repelling grazing animals, saying, no more grazing. This needs to be protected. So it puts up a carpet of thistles to keep those areas out. So when you're looking at the landscape, right, you have an idea of when you are in the landscape. So then you have an idea of what nature is handing you. In permaculture design, we learned that nature directs the land use plan. And the palette really narrows down and goes down and down and down as you begin to learn to read the patterns of the landscape more and more. It's amazingly beautiful. All these times we've cussed at the thistle. People ask me, how do you get rid of thistles? It's like you create the conditions for something else to happen. We created the conditions for thistles to happen by overgrazing it, by disturbing it, by, think about where you see thistles. Overgrazed areas, the side of the road where a blade has gone by, or, somehow compacted or horribly disturbed. It calls in the thistles, right? So how do you get rid of them? Well, mulch and compost and water, they hate that. You never see thistles in that kind of situation. Okay, again, techniques and technologies. Let's not get confused with what permaculture design is with the techniques and technologies that we've all become so familiar with or comfortable with, or maybe even infatuated with. It's like, it doesn't really, I could show you how to build a mud house, a cob house. I could show you how to build a straw bale house, but it's not going to do you any good unless you know how to read the patterns of the landscape and know when you are in the landscape, know where to put it in the landscape. That's the important part, and that is where the whole concept of permaculture design really kicks ass, really excels with other design disciplines. It truly is a holistic vision of the landscape, not just a static vision. Like, oh, let's put this building right here, or let's do this technique because we learned it in permaculture class. Let's save the swales. It's like the overused thing about young zealous permaculturist. They always got to carve a swale, whether the ground has runoff or not, issues or not. We arrive at solutions. We don't impose them. We don't confuse techniques and technologies with permaculture either. Permaculture is not an herb pile. Permaculture is not a swale. It's how you arrive at those solutions. Okay, so let's get back. So how do we find out? How do we know? What are we looking at really? What are the things that are our keys? If permaculture design is about decision making and problem solving, how do we get there? Well, we look to nature again. We look at the richness of biodiversity and what we can find there. What I want you to do is sort of imagine a few ecosystems. I'm going to run through a few just for sort of dramatic effect. I've got some listed here. We've got drylands. Drylands are unique systems. They're all over the world. Probably the most threatened systems out there. Really highly selected plant adaptations. incredible evaporation going on. So so much so that some places in Death Valley, I saw there was tensiometers that were 10 feet deep and could measure evaporative pull that were 10 feet below the surface. That's incredibly dry. Dry lands have incredibly adapted plants and animals that live there. Think about all of those different things that have to happen in order to live in the desert. Most plants don't have leaves. Get rid of the leaves. Too much edge. Too much edge to lose too much. And what leaves they have, they maybe will swell up, or they're opportunistic. They'll come right after rain and they'll photosynthesize and then they'll drop, and they won't bother with them anymore. They'll photosynthesize on their stems. They'll put like a waxy coat over themselves. They have sunken stomas, and so they're not exposed to the air. Very, very, very highly specialized plants and animals that adapt to the drylands. Really, really beautiful and eerie and incredible ecosystem. Now, let's move away from the drylands, but imagine all of this diversity. Imagine the differences in all of these different ecosystems or wetlands. Wetlands are probably, you know, some of the most beneficial areas of the landscape. Excuse me, wetlands. They have an incredible ability to recycle nutrient. They're gathering points. They're strange attractors. They've got all of these plants that have adapted to live in totally submerged water. Their root network is super fibrous. Really incredible set of plants. Um, there's these macrophyte systems that actually clean water. They use up a lot of different nutrients that we would otherwise think of as pollution. They cycle it really fast. They use it. They can bind metals. We use what we learn about wetlands and we recreate them a lot of times when we're building sort of a home ecosystem or an industrial ecology where we'll use constructed wetlands for their biologic action to clean up water. So you can think of all the different things going on, and again, a huge nursery. Another interesting thing about wetlands is that there's different trophic levels, even in shallow water. There's different temperatures of the water. There's different things happening at different depths of the water. The plants are in the broad sunlight, but there's so many of them, and one of the things that is required is that the roots be shaded. So the plants are really, really highly adapted to live in totally wet conditions. Okay, moving on. Rainforests. When we talk about rainforests, or when people talk about uh, rainforests, usually the first thing they think of is tropical forests. Really beautiful, incredible forests. I've worked in tropical rainforests in Panama and Costa Rica, all through Central America, highland Mexico, cloud forests in Mexico, all these different areas. Pretty typical of, you know, shallow soil profiles. As you move towards the equator, the soils, as a gross generalization, you know, of course, there's you know, opposite is also true. But as you get equatorial, the soils get shallower, but the diversity of the forest canopy gets greater. So if we turn around and head to the poles, right? If we head to the poles in either direction, then the diversity actually gets smaller in the canopy, but it increases in the soil. Deeper soils, richer soils, way more soil biota. All the stuff that happens in the rainforest is happening in the canopy. Thousands and thousands of species. Well, if you go up to the boreal forest, then it's kind of the opposite. Really deep soils, very few species. There's only a few climax species, but they get as big around as a house. The soils, you know, could have millions of creatures living in them. Really beautiful. What I'm asking you to imagine is the differences of all of these ecosystems, but how much we can actually learn from all of these things. The coral reefs and shallow seas, incredible, it's so incredibly diverse. Even today, it's not as diverse as it was when I was a kid, when I learned to scuba dive and snorkel and all those things. Um, but it is incredible, the nursery that happens all around the landmass of the planet in the shallow seas. It's incredible. It's mind-boggling. Um, the ideas of that being a nursery and that we need to protect it, and even the mangrove swamps around some of our areas. Vital that we learn more about them, and the deep ocean temperatures, of course, are the future. Um, Chaparral. Well, I'm sitting here in Los Angeles. We're surrounded by chaparral, pretty well known steep mountain ranges along the coast of California. Big Sur Coast, the Santa Monica Mountains have some of the steepest mountain ranges um, in California, and the plant diversity is pretty specialized again. It's dry in Southern California, so the plants here have adapted and adopted fire as their replenishing. There's not enough moisture for a lot of different mushrooms where it does the decomposition task in other climate zones and nutrient release. So what happens here is that fire releases ashes, and these plants have adapted and co-evolved with fire to absorb and be remineralized by the fire. So very important fire ecologies in these areas. Really beautiful sets of plants too. Okay, I'm asking you to think of all the differences in all of these ecosystems. Oh, these are my grandkids. They're so cute. Doesn't really have anything to do with the slideshow, except they're very diverse and really cute. I'm not sure how they got in this slideshow though. Um, what we're looking at is nature. It's looking to nature, right? How would nature do it? How is it being done, right? We want to look at how is nature doing these things. In this slide, we've got the fish representing actually transportation. A bicycle and a salmon, I think, are the most energy efficient in terms of miles per calories or distance per calories used. Incredible response from biology. There's also that blue, it's sort of color reflection. The honeycomb you can see, of course, is stacking and packing and cracking, arranging. The kelp photo, the bladders there represent a lot of different things that are happening, but mostly the anchoring effect. Like, how does it hold on to the ocean floor? Very, very interesting. Then we've got this dendritic pattern of the watershed. And when we look at the dendritic pattern like this, we look at the branching orders and think about gathering spaces, gathering and distribution, the biomimemic response. So we're all constantly asking ourselves, how would nature do it? So we look and we start adapting some of those things to how nature is doing it, to how we can actually participate too. Again, I live in Hollywood, so you get a lot of different natural system biomimicry. Human ingenuity. The thing about permaculture that I've been around the world a couple times, and every time I go someplace to teach, so-called teach, I'm the one taking the most notes. It's like I say that I'm teaching, but I'm really learning everywhere. It's amazing. There's so much human ingenuity and make you cry. It's so beautiful what people have been able to do in terms of their ideas of living in the landscape, in reflections of art and science and culture. Uh, the whole idea of the different kinds of technologies, not just sticks and stones, but higher technologies, low technologies, but just the way that people adapt to and use strategies, incredible. Permaculture design absolutely involves the human ingenuity from around the world that is just incredible. So when we look at the differences of natural systems, when we look at all of the vastness of biodiversity, the richness of how different things are, in the richness of biodiversity, commonalities do exist in every single one of those ecosystems that we went through. How different they are, there is a whole core set of principles that we have synthesized from the commonalities of all these different ecosystems. What I have done is then further synthesize it to what we call indicators of sustainability. So in every ecosystem that we describe, there is natural succession modeling. We talked about natural succession with the grasslands and the thistles. What's the next level of succession in that grassland thistle scenario, by the way? If you had a field of thistles, or if one of your clients had a field of thistles, what would be the thing? What would be the thing to recommend, or what would be the logical next step in this evolution? Right? Goats, maybe. Probably the last act is the goats after it's been denuded of minerals and all that. But what happens in natural systems, like you've seen all your life, is the next thing that happens is woody and herbaceous shrubs. So that could be berries. That could be, so we set the next stage, plant right in the thistles. Don't cut them out. Just plant right in there and let the thistles protect the young berries. And the berries will grow, nurtured by the thistles, will shade out the thistles, and then we can start planting trees. And then you see, every single system in the deserts, in those dry lands, wetlands, every single system has a natural succession modeling. That's a commonality, so that becomes one of our principles, one of our indicators of sustainability. Functional relationships. There is a functional relationship between that heavy animal and the grassland. There's a functional relationship between the grasslands, the heavy impact, and the thistles. You see how that is working? We don't want just random diversity. We want a diversity of functional relationships. We have random diversity, and sustainability isn't busting out everywhere. What we need is to focus on what is actually needed, and those are functional connections. Recycling and energy flows. When we talk about recycling, it's really we're thinking from one thing to the next. One thing to the next. Energy moves through the system. It's converted. We talk about, the grasses when we sheet mulch. The lawn is converted into nutrient. It just moves into, you see how it's recycling in a different way. What is the next best thing? What is the next best use? Recycling, and we follow energy through the system. We use energy as many times as possible before it leaves the system. Multifunctional, we talked a little bit about that. Everything in nature is multifunctional, right? There's nothing that is just does one thing in nature. It always does, it always has more than one thing to operate under. There's a tree. A tree could offer us a shade and nutrient and timber and fiber and all those things. Multitasking, multitasking. Now that is incredible. There's multiple functions for single elements and multiple elements for single functions, right? We talked a little bit about how if an area doesn't have moisture, right, to have the decomposition, the function of decomposition occur through mushrooms and mycelium, right? It may adopt something just like that. Still, we're trying to achieve decomposition so we can have mineral and nutrient uptake, and it may do it through fire, or it may call in the beetles to break it down so it's usable by plants. So the other thing that is common is that everything is happening not just in space but in time. Sequencing. There's one of my favorite Bill Mollison things that I learned from Bill Mollison is that if niches are opportunities in space, right? Niches are opportunities in space, then cycles are opportunities in time. So in permaculture design, we're always thinking about how this is truly holistic, not just a freeze frame of a holistic vision, but how is it going to evolve over time, day, night, up, down, all of those things. we talked a lot about relationships and the diversity of functional relationships. The other thing, this one I kind of threw in there, just it might be obvious, but the idea is that what we want to do is exhaust all the biological solutions before we move on to technological solutions. You know, we want to, nature does everything at ambient temperature, does everything with, you know, it doesn't extrude materials, cut off the ends, and try to think of what to do with the waste product. There's biological processes that have been worked out for a million years that we just need to be looking at and adopting. I have another story, of course, for you about the building in Phoenix. One of my clients called up and said, can we get a big air conditioner? Um, can we get an air conditioner that is working to cool our building? Right? We need a bigger air conditioner. So I go there, and sure enough, they need a air conditioner, but the idea is the highest generalization is they need to cool their building. Do you see how we're coming back to that? The highest generalization is the building needs to be cooled. One of the ways that we could do it is an air conditioner. But once we take that out of the objective and get a higher generalization, then that's one of the options. The other options include, and what we did was shade the building. It's higher, faster, smarter, cheaper to mitigate the temperature around the building before moderating the temperature from the inside out, right? Shade the building. A shaded building in Phoenix, Arizona is 20% cooler, and it's got a 20% lower heat load, which makes the building more valuable, which makes, you know, on and on and on and on. We shaded the western wall of the building. We put up a trellis. We built an area where people could eat lunch. We did all these other things for the people that work there. Remember the who and the why of why we're doing this kind of design, a holistic design. So people could eat lunch comfortably instead of trying to compete outside for a sliver of shade. We also redid the parking lot into kind of a herringbone key line thing where we're harvesting water off of the parking lot itself and trying to grow trees quickly to shade the parking lot, not just the building. So do you see how what we're trying to do is exhaust biological solutions, the shade, we actually put in cooling tunnels and vents, biological solutions before we move on to technology. I'm not against technology. I like it. I think that what we need to use it smart. We need to use it wisely. So instead of getting a bigger air conditioner, right, to make a short story long, instead of getting a bigger air conditioner, we actually got a smaller air conditioner, one that was more efficient, one that was better utilized, and because we didn't have that extreme temperature load anymore. So we worked in tandem there. Okay, so that's how we arrive at principles of design, the commonalities found in the richness of biodiversity. Okay, I forgot to say that we always start with a set of ethics. And mostly, I like to end or start at the ending of the intro to permaculture with the set of ethics, because I think that as soon as we get through some of these basic things about what permaculture design is and isn't, then we start to see that now this is the beginning. So here we are starting again, starting with a set of ethics. This is straight from the Book of Mollison. To care for the earth. And Bill Mollison brilliantly goes on to say to repair and conserve the earth and care for people that we all hear and talk about, but eloquently put and beautifully put by Bill Mollison to clarify that, to care for people, to seek peace and guard human rights everywhere. To me, that is it. That is enough right there. Invest all capital, intelligence, and goodwill and labor to these ends. So it's like, again, the highest generalization. We're not asking people to subscribe to, you know, anything more than this. Care for the earth, care for each other. We'll stop right there because that is enough. And you can see now how many people can come to the table. We didn't say and eat only vegetables or only blue things or wear only orange or do all these things or be a cowboy or be a whatever. It's like just care for the earth, care for each other. Who's on? Who's on board? Look at that. Think of how many people can come to the table now and be at peace with each other, right? So permaculture again is design protocols for decision making and problem solving. Really doesn't have anything to do with gardening unless we're applying it to gardening, right? We use the garden as a metaphor, using nature to solve some of these things. Permaculture's design protocols based on those patterns of nature and the convictions of a conserver society. And that conserver society is what I wanted to talk the rest of my time about. Conserver society. This is permaculture design. When people ask what permaculture design is, draw them this, okay? One of the things is food, but it's about everything that human settlement requires, okay? And we could go around this wheel. We could go around this wheel and we will apply all of those principles in decision making and problem solving to solve food, of course, to solve shelter, water conservation, energy conservation. That's how we use permaculture design. We're going to go around this wheel, and in the design courses, that's exactly what we do. We kind of repeat ourselves over and over and over, the same principles, but different medium. The same identical principles and attitudes come up, so then we can apply them to food. We can apply them to problem solving when it comes to energy, when it comes to all these different things that human settlement requires. And human settlement also requires, of course, wilderness and wildlands. That's sort of our zone 5 in the actual methodologies of design. So we talk about shelter and natural building. We built this oven. This woman could actually go inside and turn around and come back out. Very flexible, I guess. But this is mud. We could build houses exactly the same way. We talk about growing food and or managing soil, and food is the byproduct, right? We've got all kinds of different strategies that we've seen from around the world in collecting runoff water, collecting rainwater, utilizing what moisture we have and optimizing it. Um, We've also talked about energy, you know, to just give a little bit of time to the peak oil thing. I know that a lot of people are getting into this. Every time the world is going to end, our business booms, right? Energy descent, as what's his name talks about, David Holgram. Um, Really what we're talking about is an opportunity to diversify, right? We want to diversify everything else. Now here's our opportunity to not replace oil, but replace oil with many energy sources and energy using apparatus. Mostly, of course, we're going to do that through conservation first, but as we move out from there. This is actually very kind of sacred photograph. It's Manhattan Hinge. Twice a year, the sun sets right down the center of the street. Very beautiful. So the idea of diversifying gets us to the ideas of really celebrating diversity. If Diego's up, then there we go. Really celebrating diversity, and having some place to go with differences of opinion and celebrating that instead of just constantly surrounding ourselves with people who have the same politics or the same ideas. Or it's like we can't design ourselves out of this. We have to listen to everybody and get on top of that. But ecosystems is our sounding board. Here we've got, plant and animal systems that we know a lot about, and we're learning more, that we need to know more. But we do know that waste is managed for productivity, and consumption is offset by contribution. And what I'm asking us to do now is to think about how all of those things connect in plant and animal systems and take that same exact model, the same thing that we understand and that we hold sacred and we hold valuable and we cherish about natural systems. Let's apply it to our own ecosystems, our urban ecosystems, our own human settlements, where all of these things become connected somehow in a way that we are using them efficiently, where we become part of the ecosystem. Our products, our services, our skills are what's offsetting our consumption, our contribution of products, services, and skills. That is, to me, is permaculture design's most important adaptation and most important use. Fill fundamental functions first. We're gonna look around that wheel. We're gonna look around this wheel, and we're gonna start looking at things that need to happen first. We're gonna feed people. We're gonna house people. We're gonna water people. All these different things. The uh, the idea of getting to the core of this is what the rest of this is about, and how it's really what my upcoming book is about. That nature starts small. Okay, this is pretty important concept. Nature starts small and then repeats it, or solution multiplies. Right? It has a little cluster. The branching orders go so far and then it repeats. It doesn't just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Right? It's got to have sort of this idea of the Rachel, that was, I set you up there. You could just you could put the F word anywhere in there, and just add it anywhere. Um, Nature starts small. She asks, "Where's the fifth F?" Um, and then multiplies. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. The idea of Dunbar's number. Some of us have heard of this. It takes 100 people to support 100 people, as luck would have it. So let's take this number. Let's take this idea of um, of Dunbar's number. And this is a number that happens in a lot of different populations. You see it under stress conditions where people will organize, organisms organize, animals organize. It's kind of it's weird number. But if we took that and started to break it down, how do we make the whole city sustainable? Right? This is a pretty big question. Uh, the idea of having the city sustainable, the whole city. Well, the idea of looking at this is a picture of Los Angeles. This is where I live, right? How do you make the whole city sustainable? Well, the short answer is we can't. Well, the real answer is we haven't yet, but we can't really go about it trying to make the whole city sustainable. Nothing in natural systems works like that. It isn't trying to make the whole world sustainable all at once, the whole planet. It is small. We already know that. We've already defined that and described that, and we practice it. We start small, we multiply our successes, and that's how we get there. In Los Angeles, this is Los Angeles. I know a lot of you are surprised to see, snow on the hills in Southern California, but that's not photoshopped. The idea is in the Southland, there's 11 million people. Nothing in natural systems would lead us to believe, certainly nothing in historical times would lead us to believe that we could organize, get everybody to adapt and adopt a certain lifestyle, right? But ironically, that everybody in Los Angeles, everybody in any city could live sustainably, and that is by working in small numbers, right? That's where we're going with this. That's the idea. We're going back to nature. How does nature do things? How are those things done? We already learned the methodologies. We learned about resource and needs lists. We learned about all these different things. And now I'm asking you to sort of come with me in this methodology where we make a resource list. That's you. That's your skills, right? And we compare it to the needs list. We're going through all these people in your community. David Bonebreak. Actually, my chiropractor, his name was Bonebreak. I changed his first name in this one, but and we've got herbalists and massage therapists. This is our community. And we've got all of these different community needs. This is the list of things It'll be in my book of what, so, most of the things that we need to start filling those fundamental functions first, right? So then, just like we did in the landscape, we're looking at the pond to solve water. We're looking at this to, do that. What we're going to do here is we're going to look at you. You are the resources of this ecosystem, and we're going to start cross-referencing. Oh, we've got a plumber, and they could work in the building trades. They could help us with water. Johnny Deep can also do water. Remember, we have backup systems, multiple functions for single elements. These people have more than one thing to do. Do you see how that's working again? All those principles are starting to come back together now. And we're using it not just in the landscape, natural landscape, but now we're using it in the landscape of culture, right? So where do we go from here? Once we have determined those things, we've got these people, now we're going to come up with some people that are resources that we have that are surplus to our needs, or needs on the needs list that haven't been met. So we're going to do this simple formula, subtract what you have from what you want to determine what you still need. I can't tell you how many times people have asked me, where do we start? Where do we start? Well, identify what you have, what you need, and do the math. Because if there's any balance or there's any sum, then now we've got a new situation. Okay, so we're going to go back to those same lists, the community skills and resource list and the community needs list, and we're going to determine those resources that are still left that are surplus to our needs, right? And then we've still got unmet needs. Now we've got a list of those things staring us right in the face. Those surplus resources, now we can afford to sell and trade. We're not going to sell and trade food if we're hungry. You see how this is working? We've changed the game just immediately already. Now our unmet needs, that's where this gets interesting. This is where we focus our collective efforts to fill these local things. And remember, we're talking about 50 to 150 person units, these different people that can support each other. The idea here being that if you're a doctor, how many patients can you really handle? If you're a massage therapist, how many clients can you really handle? If you're a car mechanic, how many cars can you really work on? 100 to 150 seems to be a pretty sweet number. Think about it. And it's like we're not asking the whole world to change. We're asking a few people to cooperate and to collaborate and to, work with us on this, right? So who are those people? Well, here it is again. Here's those principles. Here's those indicators of sustainability. Now we're going to take that list and we're going to use them as the filter. Does this business show natural succession modeling? How is it diverse? How does it diversify? How does it show recycling? How is it multifunctional? That's how we get these businesses on the list. That's how we get started. What we're doing in Los Angeles is we have come to the point where we need to start organizing our skills, different neighborhoods, and we're starting earth banks where we've got builders guilds. So this is a collection of people and the associated trades, right? Legal structures, financial strategies, land access. We're going to go through all of these things and we're going to put it in a bank and we're going to work together and see what we have. We're going to go around this circle and we're going to fill these things. The idea is that everybody in the community now is going to be working. Here's a site of land. This happens to be near here. It's a food forest. This area right here is about 5, maybe 6 acres, right? And you can see all these little icons are representing different polycultures. There's a banana guild, there's a pomegranate guild, there's a lemon and a citrus guild, there's a fig guild, and there's an avocado guild. The avocado actually isn't really a guild because it doesn't really like anything around it. It's one of those things that isn't overstated in terms of its allelopathy. But avocado, you can see that there's avocados on this 5.5 acres. But the significant thing to look at here is where this 5 acres is. This is where we live. This is like 3 or 4 blocks, a couple blocks in a couple directions. This is without trying, this stuff existed. right? This is just what was inventory. This is the same map, right? And this is, look at all those houses. There's 1,000 people that live right around here. This is an incredible opportunity to look at our own communities as we already live in a community. We just need to reorganize some of the ways that we access it, some of the ways. Why are we getting in the car and driving away for an hour when if we just turned around and faced each other, 100 to 150 of us could be working for each other and not have to go anywhere? Here's our skills bank registry. You can see there's, doctors, lawyers, plumbers. Well, a lot of these things a lot of us use, right? A lot of us use. Well, look at it again. Look at this closely. Look at those dots, right? Those aren't just the people. They're the location. This is actual. This is where we are. There's the LA River. There's the LA River there. Find my red dot. You know, you actually have a river that's navigable, and they just opened it up to kayaking. Um, okay, but you can see the point is that this is where those people live. You don't have to drive somewhere to go someplace else to service people or to make money to come home so that you can go somewhere else and spend it. It's like if we just stopped and looked around, looked at each other, we could start taking care of things. Again, this is kind of what the direction my book is about, and the whole idea of what we're trying to get started as a model in and around Los Angeles. This is the LA basin. Like I said, 11 million people if you count the valley, and and we don't always count the valley, but here it is. Some of our projects happening around town. Fill fundamental functions first. This is sort of another illustration of what we can choose to participate in our community. You can see there's a whole list of things in here. But the idea is during my classes, during my design courses, at the end of the course, we play a little game that we call "Why Should We Let You Live?" And everybody kind of reintroduces themselves and comes down and chooses a couple spots on the wheel. Like, I want to contribute this to our community. I want to contribute that. And then where we don't have a lot of people, that's where we would collectively focus and fill those niches or find those people. You can see how that's working. So what is stopping us? What is stopping us? We've been doing this a long time. There's nothing to invent. All of these things are not new. We just need to be able to coordinate it a little bit better, right? So the things that usually come up right immediately are we don't have enough money, or we don't have land to deal with this. So there's a lot of different strategies now. Before we talked about techniques and technologies, when we were really looking at the landscape and how do we grow a tree and how do we create a microclimate, how do we create the conditions for fruit to occur? Well, how do we create the conditions for community to occur? How do we create the conditions for sustainability to bust out? Well, we start looking at some of these things, right? The other one is, why can't we just get along, and we have to wait for this whole paradigm shift before we can live, in harmony and all this other bullshit. Okay, the idea is that when we're talking about money, we're really talking about, just like when we did about energy and energy flow, we're talking about conservation first. Let's think our way through this first. Let's save what we have. Let's protect what we have. We put mulch down to prevent evaporation. Let's put a little insulation. We create basins so that water can infiltrate and slowly percolate in the system. We're going to treat money exactly like that. It's a flow pattern that moves through the system. We need to create basins within our community so that that money can stop and slowly percolate through our own system. We have informal situations. We have barter and trade. We've got different a little bit stepped up a notch. You've got microloan systems, and then of course complementary currency. We have one of the largest time banking networks in the country. Really been a game changer for a lot of different regions. I work in Haiti. I work in Mexico. I work in a lot of different regions if you think this is a little basic or wouldn't work for you, you may be able to recommend it to some other areas. But there's a lot of different things that we can get around just having to depend on federal dollars. But we diversify the way that we do commerce. So this is us diversifying that again. We'll trade some, we'll barter some, we'll have an hours bank for some. Hours bank, incredible, incredible. We spent a lot of money on services by the end of the year. And now we're trading time for time. So we're not using federal dollars for that. We're just contributing time to our community. And it doesn't have to be straight across. It doesn't have to be plumbing for carpentry. You get plumbing and you put your skills in a bank, and it's drawn out by someone else some other time. Brilliant. It's really like I said, a game changer in a lot of different areas. Land access. A lot of us are sitting around saying, "Oh, well, this is great, but I don't have any land." Well, there's so many things so many ways that we can go around that. Before we're talking about reduce the need to earn, and now we're really talking about reduce the need to own. We could diversify the way that we look at land and the way that we look at landscapes, but we have to develop the primary skill set, and this is very important. And that primary skill set is work hard, work harder, and then work even harder. I guarantee you it is along this path that all these other things will work. It is the person that's working hard that catches the eye of somebody giving grants. It's the person that's working hard and shows that skill set that somebody is interested in investing in, or that somebody is interested in working with, or helping with, or partnering with, or being compassionate with, or being romantic with. It's a person that is working hard to help themselves so they can help others. The Oxfam model, model, where you ask who's got land, and you also ask who doesn't have land but wants to work land. You make a list. These days it's easy on the internet, and all of a sudden you've got a list longer than your arm of people that want to give you access to their land so that you can come and grow a garden. So we're sitting over here one day saying, "Oh my gosh, I wish if we only had some place to grow food, we could do this, we could grow flowers, we could sell this, we could do that, we could feed our kids," all these different things. And then the next day after we ask, right, now we've got a dozen yards, a dozen backyards, a couple cows, a pond, an orchard, on and on. It works every single time I've ever seen it done. City farms and city as a farm, where you're looking at the city, totally different. We're utilizing different techniques, guerrilla gardening. We've got boxes of food growing under bridges in LA. We're planting the margins of LA. We've got a lot of different things going on. Land trusts are legal models, farm and garden clubs, just like, the scout camp or something. We could collectively pool monies as a community, purchase lands for non-nuisance, non-polluting enterprise, or just for timber, or just for fiber, or just for whatever it happens to be. Common Works, we can do that same thing as we do with the farm and garden clubs, but we could do it with commercial property. A lot of the things that we need for our sustainable future aren't grown in the garden. They're built and hammered out where it's noisy and dusty and hot and all of those kinds of things. So in Los Angeles, we're making headway at getting collective space, working together with wood shops, metal shops, welding shops, and really pretty exciting stuff. Farm links and CSAs, I think that we're all pretty familiar with those kinds of things, where we've got community supported agriculture. We used to call them subscription farms, which is pretty much what it is. We came up with this years ago, employee supported agriculture, where an employer, a medium-sized employer, couldn't really afford to give cash raises to their employees, but they could afford to let groups of people go work in a little bit of their land that they owned and get a garden. If you're carrying home a box of produce, $25 worth of produce every week, that's $100 a month raise in anybody's book. There's, over $1,000 raise that's actual, and it's bringing home produce. You're networking with your coworkers. You're, out in the garden for a certain period of time, and an employer a lot of people can afford that and not afford to give you cash. So I think it's another really good way to do that. let's see, Swan Song for the Lawn is a program that we do in Los Angeles that where we take lawns, front lawns, bright green lawns, we sheet mulch it. We build urbanite garden or broken concrete garden beds. We plant it and we do their lawn conversion all in one day. Swan song for the lawn. People they pay for the materials. We supply the design and the installation at no cost to them. And they're springing up everywhere. They have to agree to grow organically, of course, and give away the produce. So we only do front yards because I want people to see it and people to get involved. But we've got a lot of things going on with that. Um, Diego could give me a hand here. The slide isn't advancing. I'm going to wrap it up here. We need a third set of slides. Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks for that intermission. Oh, no, it's not. Can you try it again? Thank you. Keep going. There we go. Let me see if I can control it now. Okay, so we talked about, the perceived impediments. A lot of people talk about that there's no land, there's no money. I'll give you a couple of ideas how we could do that. We spend a big chunk of time, a third of our course, in doing this kind of economic development, but using nature as the model. The other thing that people come to all the time is that, you know, why can't we all just get along? There has to be a giant, paradigm shift, and I have such a hard time thinking about that, and I want people to understand that there's a certain amount of mythology that goes on with the harmony of nature. Look at this slide. This this doesn't seem that harmonious. Like, I'm not sure you'd want to reach out and pet this creature living in harmony. Could we do the slide again? All through nature, there's venom and violence. Here's a picture of a centipede getting a stinger through its head. Trickery and torment. You can advance the slide. This little urchin, like, come hither, little crab, and then jumps on it and eats it, right? And then deception and deceit, like eyes in the back of your head. Look at this frog with eyes in the back of his butt, right? And this shark looks like it's smiling, but not really smiling, right? Not really smiling. So I suppose that there is a cautionary tale to tell, right? With all of the sustainability stuff. There's trickery and torment, and there's deception and deceit. Just like nature, it occurs too in the sustainability movement, right? That we have this idea of beware the greenwashers. Okay, it's out there all the time. It's out there all the time. People that are sort of capitalizing on the green movement around the world. I saw an ad for green Clorox. Green bleach. One of the most accessible toxic things out there. I've also seen a lot of different things happening, like with development and construction and things like that. It's like we need to take a cautionary approach to this and not let ourselves or our friends be, lured by that and fooled by it. That the other thing is beware the eco hipsters, and you know who you are. Right? It's like every time that there's something going on in the world and it's co-opted by one group or another, that green is the new black, or this is not a fad. Okay, sustainability is important. It's not just like a trend. It's not just, it happens to be a trend, but I want its durability to last because of the common sense involved. It's very important work to us. People talking about, oh, you need to measure your carbon footprint. And, it's like somebody did my carbon footprint thing, and it's apparently I have killed everyone several times, just with my travel alone. But when I travel, I am doing things. I am doing things with my carbon footprint. It's like, don't worry about your carbon footprint so much. Worry about your handprint, that you need to get out there and do things. You need to make sure that you're learning how to do things, that you're working together, that you can learn how to, learn how to do different things that you can contribute to your community. Scrape your knuckles on things and learn how to cuss in several different languages, and lose an eye doing something, and lose a digit and lose an eye from a flying digit. Get out there and do something and make sure that people are noticing what you're doing, because you're bent over with your butt in the air and you're not out there reaching for them and preaching to them and trying to wipe all your stuff on them. It's like, make people come to you because they're interested in what you're doing, not so much what you're talking about. It's like, people need to come up to that and really see that there's a lot of people out there that want to know. We don't have to go out there and try to make it mainstream. I know that that's a popular notion, but I think we're not. I think it's not necessary. It's how we co-opt everything. We need to get out there and just do epic shit because it's the right thing to be doing, not because it's hip, not because it's trendy. But most of all, really, I think that my message is to beware the peddlers of fear. This is not something that we need to be afraid of. The world is not going to end. That might be the nightmare, that we actually have to be responsible. But the idea of how we sometimes turn our fear into anger and hate and all these other things that we try to mask it with. It's like there's nothing really to be afraid about. The future is abundant, that we can sort of channel that angst. I wanted so badly for this revolution to bust out. I wanted it to be like Mad Max. I wanted it to be like that. But then as I got older and my back got less cooperative, I really realized that we can change that, we can turn that, we can channel that same energy of a revolution into a renaissance of creativity, a renaissance of love, a renaissance of beauty in our own community, a renaissance of teaching children these things as well. That we change that we live in a community that is a community of compassion, free of fear. It's important that we make our decisions not based on fear, but based on knowledge, based on wisdom, based on caring and compassion for each other. How about if we not embrace sustainability because we fear the future? Let's embrace sustainability because we love the things we love about right now.